The difference between a regular Tuesday and the day that changes everything can be as small as a cracked voice over an intercom. Flight 2847 hummed somewhere above Kansas, cabin lights dimmed to that drowsy amber glow that makes strangers feel safe enough to sleep. In seat 8A, pressed against the cold window, a man who looked like he'd been losing fights with life sat with his eyes closed. Marcus Webb, 34 years old. Coffee stain on his wrinkled cuff. Hands too rough for the cheap wedding band he still wore. Dark circles under his eyes like bruises that wouldn't heal. The Boeing 737's engines droned their mechanical lullaby. Passengers dozed. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles. Then the intercom crackled. Captain Reynolds' voice, usually smooth as Tennessee whiskey, came through with something new in it. Something that made sleeping passengers stir. Something that sounded almost like fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." A pause that lasted too long. "We need anyone with military flight experience. Combat pilot preferred." Silence crashed through the cabin. Marcus's eyes opened, just barely. For 1 second he saw something else. Fire, sky burning, screaming through static. He closed them again, tried to disappear, but the footsteps were already coming. "Sir," the flight attendant's voice was soft, careful. "Were you ever a pilot? Before we go further, drop a comment with your city. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you into Marcus's world." 36 hours earlier, Marcus Webb woke at 4:30 in the morning because his body didn't know how to sleep past sunrise anymore. The alarm wouldn't go off for another hour, but he was already awake, staring at the ceiling of his Capitol Hill apartment in Denver, counting cracks in the plaster like he'd done every morning for 3 years. The room was dark, cold. January in Colorado didn't care about broken heating systems or overdue utility bills. He sat up slowly, careful not to make noise. Down the narrow hallway, his 7-year-old son slept in a room that used to be a walk-in closet. Marcus had painted it blue when Jake was 4, back when Lydia was alive, back when things like paint colors and superhero posters seemed important. The kitchen was small enough that Marcus could touch both walls if he stretched. He filled the coffee maker ancient and stained the kind you find at Goodwill for $3. While it gurgled and hissed, he stood at the window looking down at the street. Streetlights painted everything orange. A homeless man pushed a shopping cart past the corner bodega. The world waking up to another hard day. His phone lit up on the counter. 5:15 a.m. Too early for good news. Sarah's name on the screen. His older sister. She lived in Boston, worked as a nurse, called maybe once a month to check if he was still breathing. Marcus. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way people sound when they're trying not to cry. "It's Mom." His hand tightened around the phone. "She had a stroke last night. They got her to Mass General, but..." Sarah's breath caught. "They don't know if she'll make it through the weekend." The coffee maker beeped. Marcus didn't move. "I need you to come," Sarah said. "She's asking for you." "I'll be there." "Marcus, I know money's tight, but..." "I said I'll be there." After she hung up, Marcus stood in the kitchen for a long time. The coffee went cold in the pot. Outside, the sky started turning that dirty gray that passes for dawn in winter. He opened his laptop. The screen glowed harsh in the dark apartment. Bank account, $347.62. Last-minute flights, Denver to Boston, $420. Rent, due in 5 days, $950. Jake's school lunch account, negative $23 red letters screaming at him from the parent portal. Marcus tried his credit card 3 times before it finally went through. The confirmation email felt like a sentencing. He had worked a double shift the night before. Started at 6 p.m. as night supervisor at the King Soopers warehouse off I-25, loading trucks and managing inventory until the sun came up. Then stayed for another 8 hours when Jimmy called in sick because nobody else would cover, and Marcus needed every dollar he could scrape together. His coworker Tommy had looked at him around 2 a.m., forklift idling between pallets of canned goods. "Man, you look like death. Just need to get through tomorrow," Marcus had said. Except tomorrow turned into his mother dying and a flight he couldn't afford, and leaving Jake with the neighbors who'd already done too much. He went back to the bedroom. The framed photo on his nightstand sat face down like it had for 3 years. He knew what was in it without looking. Marcus, in his dress blue's 29-year-old arm around Lydia at their courthouse wedding. Her, in a white sundress from Target flowers in her dark hair, laughing at something he'd said. Jake, not even born yet, just a secret, growing inside her, a future they'd planned in whispered conversations late at night. The accident happened on I-25 during a snowstorm. Some teenager texting slid into her lane. Lydia's Civic went under a semi-truck. The state trooper who came to Marcus's door said she didn't suffer. Marcus didn't believe him then, didn't believe him now. Jake had been 4 years old. He kept asking when Mommy was coming home. Marcus didn't have an answer that made sense to a 4-year-old. Hell, he didn't have an answer that made sense to himself. At 6:30, Marcus pushed open Jake's door. The room smelled like little boy, that mix of sleep and dirt and grape juice. Glow-in-the-dark stars covered the ceiling, an old project from when Lydia was still around to do things like that. Jake was curled under his Avengers comforter, small and impossibly fragile. "Hey, buddy." Marcus sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "Time to wake up." Jake's eyes opened, brown, like Lydia's. "Is it morning?" "Yeah, listen, I need to talk to you about something." Jake sat up, rubbing his face. He was wearing pajamas, 2 sizes too big, hand-me-downs from Mrs. Chen's grandson next door. His hair stuck up in the back. Marcus tried to smooth it down. "I have to go on a trip today," Marcus said. "Grandma's sick." Jake's face changed. He was 7, but he understood sick. Understood that sick could mean gone, like when Mom got sick. The question hit Marcus in the chest. "No, different. The doctors are helping her. I just need to go see her for a few days." "How many days?" 3, maybe 4. "Mrs. Chen is going to watch you okay. You like staying there?" Jake nodded slowly. Then he climbed out of bed and went to his dresser, pulling out his battered backpack. Started putting things in it, a comic book, his toothbrush, a small stuffed bear worn smooth from years of holding. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. "Helping you pack." "Buddy, you're not coming. You have school." "Not for me." Jake held up the teddy bear. "For you. For good luck." Marcus took the bear. It weighed almost nothing. Jake had slept with this thing since he was 2. Wouldn't go anywhere without it. And now he was giving it up because he thought his dad needed it more. "You're the bravest person I know," Jake said, voice small and serious. Marcus pulled his son close, buried his face in that messy hair so Jake wouldn't see him crying. Brave. The word tasted like ash. He hadn't felt brave since the last time he'd climbed into an F-16 cockpit. Since the last mission. Since he'd pulled up at the last second and still heard screaming through the radio and decided he was done. Done flying. Done being responsible for lives. Done with all of it. Now he loaded trucks and came home smelling like cardboard, and tried to remember how to be both mother and father to a kid who kept looking at him like he was some kind of hero. Mrs. Chen met them at her door at 7:30. She was 72, bent with age, hands twisted from arthritis. But her eyes were kind. Always had been from the day Marcus and Lydia moved in next door with a newborn and no idea what they were doing. "You take care of your mama," Mrs. Chen said, not asking for money she knew Marcus didn't have. Jake will be fine here. Jake hugged Marcus hard. Bring back the bear, okay? He's just borrowing good luck. He has to come home. I promise. Marcus drove to Denver International in his 15-year-old Honda, checking the gas gauge every 5 minutes like it might magically refill itself. He'd put in $10 worth, enough to get there and back with nothing to spare. The airport was chaos. Tuesday morning business travelers everywhere pulling roller bags and talking into AirPods, moving through the world like they belonged in it. Marcus felt like a ghost. Unwashed, unshaven. His work shirt still smelled like the warehouse, that mix of concrete dust and sweat and exhaustion. He'd packed a single backpack. Extra shirt, deodorant. Jake's teddy bear wrapped in a clean sock so it wouldn't get dirty. That was it. That was everything he could carry. Security took forever. The TSA agent looked at him like he was a problem waiting to happen, made him take off his boots, empty his pockets twice, stand in the scanner with his arms up, while strangers studied his body for threats. When he finally got to the gate, he had 20 minutes until boarding. He sat in a hard plastic chair and stared at nothing. Around him, people lived their normal lives. Bought $5 coffees, complained about delayed connections, scrolled through phones. Marcus just sat there holding his backpack, feeling the weight of the teddy bear inside. A woman sitting across from him shifted her purse away when he looked up. A businessman in the next row moved seats. Marcus was used to it. People saw what they wanted to see. Saw a tired man with rough hands and old clothes and assumed the worst. They called his group to board. Marcus shuffled forward with the others, scanning pass after pass down the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the door smiled automatically, that professional flight attendant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Welcome aboard. Marcus nodded. Didn't trust his voice. Seat 8A, window, economy. The seat was narrow and the headrest had a stain he tried not to think about. He wedged his backpack under the seat in front of him, buckled in, pressed his forehead against the cold plastic window. The plane filled up around him. A woman in 8B took one look at him and angled her body away, creating as much space as possible between them. Marcus didn't blame her. He probably looked like someone you'd cross the street to avoid. The safety demonstration played on screens. Flight attendants went through the motions. Nobody paid attention. Marcus closed his eyes, thought about his mother in a hospital bed in Boston, thought about Jake sleeping at Mrs. Chen's tonight without his lucky bear, thought about Lydia buried in Crown Hill Cemetery, a place he hadn't visited in 6 months because looking at that headstone made him want to stop breathing. The engines roared. The plane shook and lifted. Denver fell away below mountains, disappearing into clouds. Marcus hadn't flown since leaving the Air Force. Hadn't wanted to. But now he was 30,000 feet above the earth in Seat 8A, exhausted beyond measure, broke beyond repair. Trying to get to his dying mother on credit he'd never pay off. Sleep pulled at him. 38 hours without rest. His body screaming for shutdown. Just before he went under, he felt the teddy bear through the fabric of his backpack, pressed against his ankle. Jake's voice in his memory. You're the bravest person I know. Marcus wasn't brave. He was just a man who kept showing up because he didn't know what else to do. The cabin lights dimmed. The engine hummed. Passengers settled into their private worlds. And Marcus Webb, father and widower and former combat pilot, slept the desperate sleep of someone who'd been running on empty for 3 years straight. He didn't dream, didn't stir, didn't notice when turbulence rattled the cabin an hour into the flight, didn't hear the first announcement, didn't know that in a few minutes a voice would come over the intercom and ask a question that would crack open something he'd spent 3 years trying to keep buried. All he knew was darkness and exhaustion, and the faint hope that when he woke up his mother would still be alive. The turbulence hit at 11:47 a.m., somewhere over the endless flatness of Kansas. Marcus felt it in his sleep first. A shudder through the fuselage like the plane had driven over a pothole in the sky. His eyes moved beneath closed lids. His hand twitched on the armrest. Around him, passengers stirred. The businessman in row 7 glanced up from his laptop. The elderly woman across the aisle gripped her husband's hand. A baby started crying 2 rows back, that panicked infant sound that spreads anxiety like a virus. Another jolt. Harder this time. The seatbelt sign dinged on. A flight attendant walking down the aisle grabbed the nearest headrest to steady herself, smiling that professional smile that said everything was normal. This was fine. Turbulence was just air doing what air does at 30,000 feet. Marcus slept through it. His body was too far gone running on fumes and desperation. In his dream, he was back in Denver watching Jake wave from Mrs. Chen's window. Except in the dream, the window kept getting farther away no matter how fast Marcus ran. Up in the cockpit, Captain Tom Reynolds adjusted his grip on the yoke. 55 years old. 32 years flying commercial. 20,000 hours in the air. Gray hair cut military short lines around his eyes from squinting at horizons. He'd flown through worse turbulence than this, much worse. "Just some chop," he said to his first officer. "Should pass in a minute." Mitchell, the first officer, nodded. 32 years old, 5 years with the airline, still young enough to get nervous during bumpy rides. His hands rested light on his controls, ready to take over if needed. Then the instrument panel beeped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small sound that meant something was different than it should be. Reynolds' eyes scanned the gauges. "You seeing this?" Mitchell leaned forward. "Hydraulic pressure on System 2. It's dropping." "How fast?" "Not fast, but steady." Reynolds reached for the overhead panel, flipped a switch. "Switching to backup system." They waited. The numbers on the screen should have stabilized, should have climbed back to normal. They didn't. "Backup's not responding correctly," Mitchell said. His voice stayed level, but his shoulders tensed. "Pressure's holding, but I'm getting fluctuations." Reynolds had been flying long enough to know the difference between a problem and a problem. This was the first kind. Manageable, annoying, the kind of thing that made for paperwork and delayed connections, but didn't put planes in fields. Still, "Run the checklist," he said, "and let's get maintenance on the radio." In the cabin, the turbulence faded. The ride smoothed out. Passengers relaxed. Laptops reopened. The baby stopped crying. Marcus slept on chin tilted toward the window, breathing slow and steady. Seat 8B. The woman next to him was named Patricia Novak. 43 years old, marketing executive from Denver, flying to Boston for her daughter's wedding. She looked at Marcus when he sat down and made an instant decision. Unshaven, rough clothes, that hollow look in his eyes. She'd angled her body away, created distance, pulled her purse closer. Now she tried to focus on her phone, scrolling through emails, but kept glancing at the sleeping man beside her. She felt guilty about judging him, but not guilty enough to stop. Across the aisle, in 8C, sat Derek Chen, and 22 college senior at CU Boulder, heading home to visit his Air Force veteran father in Connecticut. Headphones in, laptop out, trying to finish an essay that was already 3 days late. He had the kind of face that still looked teenage, despite being old enough to buy beer. His father had flown cargo planes in the Gulf War. Derek had grown up on stories of cockpits and missions, and the weight of responsibility at altitude. Behind Marcus row 9 sat Robert Martinez, 50 years old, insurance adjuster, divorced twice, flying to Boston to close a claim on a warehouse fire. He'd noticed Marcus bored late, noticed the exhaustion, the way he moved, like every step cost something. Robert had been there once. Different details, same weight. After his second divorce, he'd lived in his car for 3 months, worked day shifts and slept in parking lots and slowly clawed his way back. So when he looked at the sleeping man in 8A, he didn't see a problem. He saw someone fighting a war nobody else could see. Row 15 seats E and F. Walter and Helen Morrison. Married 52 years. Walter was 76, Helen 73. This was their first flight in 5 years. Walter's hip had finally healed enough for travel. They were going to see their granddaughter in Cambridge, meet her new baby, their first great-grandchild. Walter had served in Korea. Navy. 1952. He'd seen rough seas and rougher men, and he knew what combat did to a person's eyes. The way it carved something out and left a space that never quite filled back in. Row 22, Seat A. Sophia Rodriguez, 28. Single mother, baby Emma, 6 months old, strapped to her chest in a carrier. Flying to Boston for her sister's funeral. Emma had cried during takeoff, screamed during the turbulence, finally exhausted herself into sleep. Sophia held her close, one hand supporting the small head terror still humming through her body. She kept thinking about crashing about her baby, about dying, before Emma was old enough to remember her. The fear was irrational. She knew that. Didn't make it feel less real. Up front in the cockpit, Reynolds and Mitchell worked through procedures. The hydraulic system wasn't failing. Not exactly, but it wasn't right either. Like a car engine that runs, but makes a sound it shouldn't. You could probably drive it home. Probably. But you'd be listening to that sound the whole way, wondering when probably turns into maybe not. "What are you thinking?" Mitchell asked. Reynolds didn't answer right away. He was thinking about his daughter Amanda, who'd called him this morning before his Denver layover. She was 8 months pregnant with his first grandchild. A boy. They'd already picked out a name. Thomas, after Reynolds. The call had been routine, just checking in, but something about it had stuck with Reynolds all morning. The fragility of it. New life coming. His daughter becoming a mother. The way everything could change in a heartbeat. "I'm thinking," Reynolds said slowly, "that we're fine. Systems are holding. We can land this plane without issue. But I'd feel better with a backup plan." "What kind of backup plan?" Reynolds looked at the instrument panel. Looked at the endless sky ahead. "You ever have another pilot in the cockpit when things got weird?" "Sure. During training." "It helps. Just having someone who speaks the language, someone who understands what you're looking at." Mitchell understood what he was asking. "You want to see if there's another pilot on board. Not to fly, just to consult. An extra set of eyes. Is that even—" "It's my aircraft," Reynolds said. "My call." He reached for the intercom, finger hovering over the button. This wasn't protocol. Wasn't standard. Asking for passengers to help manage a situation usually meant the situation was worse than it was. It would scare people. Cause panic. But Reynolds had learned something in 32 years of flying. Fear comes from uncertainty. People could handle truth better than they could handle silence and imagination. He pressed the button. The intercom crackled to life throughout the cabin. That distinctive ding that makes everyone look up. Marcus stirred in seat 8A, not quite awake, still caught between sleep and consciousness. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds." His voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath, something that made Patricia in 8B sit up straighter, something that made Derek pull out his headphones. Something that made Walter reach for Helen's hand. "We're experiencing a minor technical situation with one of our hydraulic systems." Marcus's eyes opened, staring at the seat in front of him, not fully processing yet. "Everything is under control, and we're in no immediate danger." Passengers looking around now, nervous murmurs spreading like ripples. "However, as a precautionary measure, I'm going to ask if there's anyone on board with military flight training." Marcus was awake now. Completely. Heart starting to pound. Preferably someone with combat aviation experience. The cabin went silent. Not the peaceful quiet of people resting. The heavy silence of held breath and racing thoughts. If you have this background, please notify a flight attendant immediately. The intercom clicked off. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. Then everyone started looking around, scanning faces, searching for a hero, someone who could fix this, someone who knew what to do when the people in charge admitted they needed help. Marcus sat frozen in 8A. His hands gripped the armrests. His breathing had gone shallow. Combat aviation experience. The words echoed in his head, in Lydia's voice, in his old squadron commander's voice, in the voice of the radio operator from that last mission over Kandahar when everything went sideways and Marcus had to make a choice in 3 seconds that he'd been questioning for 10 years. He closed his eyes. Not now. Not this. Not after everything. The memories came anyway. They always did. F-16 cockpit. HUD display glowing green in the darkness. G-forces pressing against his chest like a hand squeezing. Radio chatter. Viper 2, you are cleared hot. Target is marked. Confirm visual. Marcus looking down through the canopy. Seeing the building outlined in infrared. Seeing the shapes moving around it. Intel said enemy combatants. Intel said the building was empty except for weapons cache. Intel said a lot of things that turned out to be complicated when you were the one pushing buttons at 400 knots. Viper 2 confirmed visual. Marcus seeing something. A flash of movement, wrong size, wrong speed, his thumb over the pickle button, every instinct screaming. Abort! Abort! Someone else on the radio. Not his target. Someone else's. Marcus pulling up hard, banking away. The building untouched below him. Later, they'd found out. Civilian family, wrong building, bad coordinates. If Marcus had been 2 seconds slower on the abort, if his instinct had been less sharp, if he'd trusted the briefing instead of his eyes. He'd landed that night and filed his flight plan and walked to his quarters and quit. Just like that. 10 years. Captain. Ace pilot. Combat decorations. Gone. Because he couldn't trust himself anymore. Couldn't trust that the next time his instinct would be fast enough. Marcus opened his eyes in seat 8A. His hands were shaking. He couldn't do this. Couldn't walk up there and pretend he was still the person who belonged in a cockpit. That person died over Afghanistan. This person, this broken-down warehouse worker who could barely keep his kid fed, this person had no business anywhere near flight controls. A flight attendant was moving down the aisle. Jessica Park, 29 years old, 5 years with the airline. She'd been trained to spot things, passengers who needed help, passengers who might be problems, passengers who were more than they appeared. She'd noticed Marcus when he boarded, the way he moved, the posture. Something about the way he scanned the cabin before sitting down. Military bearing even buried under exhaustion and civilian clothes. She'd seen it before. Her brother was Army, Iraq veteran. He moved the same way. Now, walking down the aisle after the captain's announcement, she was looking for someone. Anyone. A hand raised, a person standing, someone saying, "Yes, I can help." The cabin stayed silent, passengers staring at each other, waiting for someone else to be the hero. Jessica reached row 8, looked at Marcus, really looked, saw the way his jaw was clenched, the way his breathing had changed, the way he was staring straight ahead like he was seeing something that wasn't there. She'd bet everything she owned that this man had flown something somewhere sometime. The signs were all there. She crouched down next to seat 8A, gentle, non-threatening. "Sir," her voice quiet, just for him. Marcus didn't move, didn't acknowledge her. "Sir, are you all right?" His eyes shifted, looked at her. For a moment, Jessica saw something that made her chest tight. Pain, deep and old and still bleeding. "I'm fine," Marcus said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Jessica hesitated. This was a choice. Push or walk away. Captain needed help. This man clearly had demons, but sometimes demons and duty lived in the same person. "I need to ask you something," she said. Marcus shook his head. "Whatever you're going to ask, the answer is no." "Sir, I can't help. I'm sorry. Find someone else." "Were you in the military?" The question landed like a punch. Marcus looked away, stared at the window, clouds sliding past outside. 30,000 feet of empty air between him and the ground. "Air Force," he said finally, voice barely audible. "Long time ago. Jessica's training said don't push traumatized passengers. Her instinct said this man was exactly who the captain needed." "What did you fly?" Marcus closed his eyes. "F-16s, combat missions, Afghanistan, Iraq, 10 years total, but I've been out for almost as long. The captain is asking for you. He's asking for a pilot. I'm not a pilot anymore. You logged flight hours. You have experience. I have nightmares." Marcus opened his eyes, looked at her directly. "I have a 7-year-old kid who I can barely feed. I have a dead wife and a dying mother and $38 in my checking account after I bought this ticket. I have panic attacks in grocery stores when I hear certain sounds. What I don't have is the right to walk into that cockpit and pretend I'm someone who can help." Jessica stayed crouched beside him. She'd lost count of how many passengers she'd talked down from panic attacks, medical emergencies, drunken episodes. This was different. This man wasn't panicking. He was too controlled, too careful, like he'd built walls around something and spent years making sure they never cracked. "Captain Reynolds doesn't need you to be perfect," Jessica said. "He just needs someone who understands what he's looking at. I'm not who you think I am. I think you're someone who showed up on this flight when you probably couldn't afford to. Someone traveling to see family. Someone who looks like he's been fighting for a long time." She paused. "Am I wrong?" Marcus didn't answer. Patricia in 8B was watching now. So was Derek across the aisle. Robert behind them. All pretending not to listen but hearing every word. "My brother came back from Iraq 7 years ago," Jessica said. "He didn't talk for 6 months, wouldn't leave the house. Thought he was useless, broken. Then one day neighbor's house caught fire, everyone standing around waiting for firefighters. My brother just went in, pulled out a kid and a dog, didn't think about it, just did it." She looked at Marcus. "You know what he told me after he said he didn't feel like a hero. He just felt like maybe he wasn't completely useless. Maybe he could still do one thing right." Marcus's throat was tight. "Your brother sounds brave." "He was terrified, still is most days, but he showed up anyway." "I don't know if I can." "Then come find out." The moment stretched, Marcus staring at nothing, Jessica waiting, the plane humming around them. In his backpack under the seat wrapped in a sock, Jake's teddy bear. "You're the bravest person I know, Dad." Marcus thought about his son, about Lydia, about his mother in a hospital bed asking for him, about all the ways he'd failed and all the ways he kept failing, and the exhausting weight of just existing in a world that didn't care whether he made it or not. Then he thought about the captain's voice, the crack in it, the admission that things weren't quite right and he needed help. Maybe that was the point. Maybe nobody had it figured out. Maybe everyone was just doing their best with broken pieces. Marcus took a breath, then another. "If I go up there," he said quietly, "I'm not promising anything. I don't know if I'll be useful. I don't know if I remember enough. I don't know if I'll freeze up or panic or make things worse." "Understood," Jessica said. "But if the captain really needs another set of eyes, he does." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. His hands were still shaking, his heart pounding against his ribs, every instinct screaming to sit back down, disappear, let someone else handle this. But he stood up anyway. The cabin noticed, heads turning, whispers starting. Patricia in 8B looked at him with wide eyes. This man she'd judged this exhausted stranger was walking toward the cockpit. Derek pulled out his headphones, completely watching. Robert nodded slightly, a gesture of respect between men who knew what it cost to stand when sitting felt safer. Jessica stepped back, giving Marcus room to move into the aisle. He stood there for a second, swaying slightly, jet lag and exhaustion and fear making the floor feel unsteady. The walk from row 8 to the cockpit was maybe 30 feet, felt like miles, felt like walking toward something he'd spent 10 years running from. "Sir," Jessica said gently, "the captain is waiting." Marcus looked down at her. "What's your name, Jessica?" "Jessica, if I go up there and prove I'm useless, will you remind my son that I tried? You're not going to be useless." "You don't know that." "No," she agreed. "But you won't know either unless you walk." Marcus started moving, one foot in front of the other, down the aisle past curious passengers and worried faces, past the galley where another flight attendant watched with something like hope, past the curtain dividing economy from first class. His vision tunneled, his breathing shallow. Every step closer to the cockpit felt like walking toward a cliff edge in the dark. But he kept walking, because somewhere behind him, wrapped in a sock in his backpack, was a teddy bear his son thought held magic. And somewhere ahead in a hospital in Boston, his mother was waiting. And somewhere in between on this plane full of strangers was a captain who'd admitted he needed help. Marcus reached the cockpit door. Jessica beside him knocking a pattern. The lock clicked, the door opened. Captain Reynolds turned in his seat, weathered face lined with 32 years of responsibility and weather patterns, and carrying people safely through the sky. Their eyes met. Reynolds saw what Jessica had seen. Military posture, combat scars that didn't show on skin. A man carrying weight. "Captain?" Reynolds asked. Marcus swallowed hard. "Webb, Marcus Webb. I was Air Force, F-16 pilot, 1,200 combat hours. But that was 10 years ago, and I don't know if—" "Get in here," Reynolds said. Marcus stepped into the cockpit. The door closed behind him with a final sounding click. And suddenly he was surrounded by instruments and sky, and the familiar but foreign landscape of controls he'd once known, as well as breathing. His hands started trembling harder, his vision blurred at the edges. This was a mistake. He shouldn't be here. He wasn't qualified anymore. He was going to fail these people the way he'd failed everyone else. "Captain Webb," Reynolds said, and his voice was kind, understanding. "I don't need you to fly my airplane. I just need someone who speaks the language. Can you do that?" Marcus looked at the control panel, looked at the sky ahead, looked at this man who'd admitted he was afraid and asked for help instead of pretending he had all the answers. "I can try," Marcus said. And somewhere deep in the part of him that had been buried for 10 years, something that used to be a pilot stirred and remembered what it felt like to have wings. The first thing that hit Marcus when he stepped fully into the cockpit was the smell. Aviation fuel mixed with electronics and recycled air, and that particular scent of altitude that you can't explain to someone who's never flown. It reached into his memory and pulled out 1,000 missions, 1,000 sunrises at 40,000 feet, 1,000 moments when he'd been someone different. His knees went weak. He gripped the doorframe metal cool under his palm, fighting the surge of vertigo that had nothing to do with height and everything to do with time collapsing. 10 years vanished. He was 29 again, climbing into an F-16, running pre-flight checks, believing he was invincible. Then the moment passed and he was 34 and broken, and standing in a commercial airliner cockpit, trying not to throw up. "You all right?" Reynolds asked. Marcus forced himself to nod, to let go of the doorframe, to step fully into the small space where two pilots sat surrounded by instruments and sky. The cockpit was smaller than he remembered, different layout than military jets, but the language was the same. Altitude indicators, airspeed, heading, the glowing screens showing system status in green and yellow and red. Through the windscreen, endless blue sky and cloud formations that looked like mountain ranges made of vapor. "This is First Officer Mitchell," Reynolds said, gesturing to the younger man in the right seat. Mitchell turned, offered a tight smile. His eyes were uncertain, measuring Marcus, wondering if this disheveled passenger was going to help or make things worse. "Marcus Webb," Marcus managed. His voice sounded far away. "Former Air Force, F-16s. "How long since you flew?" Mitchell asked. 10 years, give or take. "Combat hours." 1,200. "Afghanistan and Iraq. Close air support, interdiction, some reconnaissance." Reynolds exchanged a glance with Mitchell. Combat pilots were a different breed. You didn't rack up 1,200 hours in a war zone without learning how to think fast when systems failed and situations went sideways. "Here's where we are," Reynolds said, voice steady and clear. "Teacher mode, briefing mode. About 90 minutes ago, we started getting fluctuations in hydraulic system 2, not failing, just not responding normally." Marcus moved closer, careful not to touch anything. His eyes scanned the panel, finding the hydraulic readouts automatically. Muscle memory taking over even as his conscious mind screamed that he didn't belong here. "Backup system," he asked. "Engaged?" Mitchell said. "It's holding, but we're seeing pressure variations, nothing critical, but enough that we're running contingency protocols." Marcus studied the numbers. Green, mostly, a few yellows. Nothing screaming emergency. But he'd learned young that the difference between coming home and not coming home often lived in the space between green and yellow. "What's your approach plan?" Marcus asked. Reynolds looked surprised. "Good question, the kind a pilot asks, not a passenger. Standard descent into Boston. We've alerted ground that we might need emergency equipment standing by, but that's precautionary. I've landed with worse hydraulic issues." "Have you?" Marcus heard himself ask. "Not in a 737, Reynolds admitted. "In the Navy, yeah, 30 years ago. Different bird." "Navy, carrier landings. S-3 Viking, retired as commander." Reynolds smiled slightly. "Long time ago. Different life." Marcus understood. Different lives. People you used to be. "So you're not asking me up here because you don't know what you're doing," Marcus said slowly. "No," Reynolds agreed. "I'm asking you up here because sometimes it helps to have someone who understands what I'm looking at. Someone who's been in the seat when things got complicated." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not being asked to save the day, not being put in charge, just being asked to stand witness, to be present, to speak a language that most people didn't know existed. "I can do that," he said quietly. For the next few minutes they talked through scenarios. What if the hydraulic pressure dropped further? What if they lost the backup? What if they needed to land with partial control authority? Marcus found himself falling into the rhythm of it. Question and answer. Problem and solution. The mechanical poetry of flight systems and physics. His hands wanted to move to gesture to touch controls he hadn't touched in a decade. He kept them pressed against his thighs, balled into fists, forcing himself to just talk, just think, just be the extra brain Reynolds needed. In the F-16, Marcus said. We trained for hydraulic failure at high speed. The response time is different, obviously. Lighter aircraft, but the principle's the same. You need to think ahead of the airplane. Anticipate what it's going to want to do before it does it. What was your approach speed with degraded hydraulics? Mitchell asked. Depended on configuration, but usually 20 to 30 knots faster than normal. Gives you more control authority. Reynolds nodded. We're already planning a faster approach. Good to know the math tracks. They talked about flare timing, about brake application, about the moment of touchdown, when everything had to work right or nothing would. Marcus felt his mind sharpening, focusing. This language, these concepts, they'd been buried but not forgotten, like riding a bicycle, like muscle memory encoded in neurons and synapses. Then Mitchell said something about weapons systems integration, and Marcus's brain misfired. Suddenly, he wasn't in the cockpit anymore. He was over Kandahar. Night mission. HUD glowing green. Target coordinates locked. Buildings below reduced to infrared shapes. Radio chatter filling his helmet. Viper 2 confirmed target. Marcus looking down. Seeing the compound. Seeing movement. Too much movement. Wrong patterns. Viper 2, you are cleared hot. Confirm. His thumb over the weapons release. Every second counting. The target coordinates were solid. Intel was solid. The briefing was solid. Trust the system. Trust the chain. Trust everything except the screaming instinct that said something was wrong. Flash of smaller shapes, running, kids-sized. Abort, abort, civilian presence, abort, someone else on the radio. Not his target. Different mission. But the word abort cutting through everything. Marcus pulling up hard, banking away weapons still armed. Target untouched. G-forces crushing his chest. His vision graying at the edges. Later on the ground. Debrief. The compound was exactly what Intel said. Weapons cache. Enemy combatants. Legitimate target. But 2 buildings over wrong coordinates a family. If the other pilot hadn't called abort for his own mission, if Marcus had been 2 seconds faster on the trigger, if his instinct had been a fraction slower, the mission report called it a success. No civilian casualties. Objective achieved. But Marcus had filed his flight plan and walked to his squadron commander's office and said 3 words, "I'm done, sir," because he couldn't trust himself anymore. Couldn't trust that next time his instinct would be fast enough. Couldn't live with the weight of knowing that the difference between hero and war criminal was 2 seconds and a gut feeling. Captain Webb, Reynolds' voice cut through. Concerned. Marcus blinked, realized he'd stopped talking mid-sentence. His breathing had gone shallow, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cockpit's cool air. "Sorry," Marcus said. "I'm sorry." "You with us?" Reynolds asked gently. "Yeah, I'm here." But his hands were shaking again. The instrument panel seemed to pulse and blur. Reynolds studied him for a moment. Long look, understanding in those weathered eyes. "Take a breath, Captain," he said. "Calm, no judgment." "We've got time," Marcus breathed. In through his nose, out through his mouth. The technique they'd taught him at the VA hospital during the 3 sessions he'd attended before deciding therapy was just another thing he couldn't afford. Mitchell was watching to uncertainty on his young face, wondering if bringing this guy up here was a mistake. "I'm all right," Marcus said. It's been a while. I know the feeling," Reynolds said quietly. "After I left the Navy, didn't fly for 2 years. Civilian flying felt wrong, somehow. Different stakes. Then one day I got back in the seat and everything came flooding back. Good and bad." "How long did it take," Marcus asked, "to feel normal again?" "Still working on it," Reynolds said with a half smile. 28 years later. The honesty landed clean, no pretense, no bravado. Just one veteran to another, admitting that some things never quite heal you, just learn to function around them. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Tell me what you see," Reynolds said. "You're looking at these instruments with fresh eyes, combat pilot eyes. Anything seem off to you?" Marcus forced himself to focus, to look at the panel not as a trauma trigger but as a problem to solve. He scanned readouts, checked cross-references, looked for patterns. "Your trim looks slightly nose-heavy," he said after a moment. Mitchell checked. "He's right, by about half a degree. Could be compensating for the hydraulic asymmetry," Reynolds said. "Good catch." They worked through more scenarios. Marcus asking questions, Reynolds and Mitchell answering, sometimes the other way around. The conversation falling into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Then Reynolds said something that changed everything. "Want to know the truth?" Marcus looked at him. "What?" Reynolds was quiet for a moment. His hands rested light on the yoke's slight adjustments, keeping them level through invisible currents. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer, more human. "The hydraulic issue. We can handle it. Mitchell and I have the training. We have the procedures. This airplane will land safely with or without your help." Marcus frowned. "Then why am I here?" Reynolds looked out the windscreen at the endless sky. "This morning, before I left Denver, my daughter called, Amanda. She's 8 months pregnant, due in 3 weeks. It's my first grandchild, a boy. They're naming him Thomas, after me." He paused. Marcus waited. "She called to tell me she'd felt him kick, that the nursery was ready, that she was excited and terrified and couldn't wait to meet him." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "And for the first time in 32 years of flying, I felt afraid, not for me, for all these people, for going home, for missing my grandson's birth because I screwed something up." Mitchell looked surprised. He'd been flying with Reynolds for 6 months, had never heard the captain talk like this. "I've flown through hurricanes," Reynolds continued, "landed with engines failing, dealt with medical emergencies and drunk passengers and everything in between. Never felt fear, not real fear. Then, this morning, thinking about that baby, thinking about my daughter waiting for me to come home." He trailed off. Marcus understood completely. Fear wasn't about skill. Fear was about having something to lose. "You needed to know you weren't alone," Marcus said quietly. Reynolds nodded. "Yeah. That's why you asked for another pilot. That's why I asked for someone who'd understand what it feels like to be responsible for lives, to carry that weight, to wonder if you're still good enough." The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and the whisper of air over the fuselage. Marcus thought about all the times he'd felt alone. 3 years of carrying Jake by himself, working double shifts, watching his bank account drain, standing in grocery store aisles, paralyzed by the weight of choosing between food and rent, nobody to share the burden, nobody who understood. "Fear doesn't make you weak," Marcus said. "It makes you careful. You sound like you've been there. Every day for 3 years. "What happened?" Mitchell asked, then looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's personal." "My wife died," Marcus said simply. "Car accident, ice on the highway. Left me with a 7-year-old and a mortgage and about 10,000 ways to fail him every single day." Reynolds turned in his seat, full attention on Marcus now. "But you showed up today. Got on a plane you probably couldn't afford to see your mother. Didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You chose to show up." Marcus shook his head. "I chose to run. I've been running for 10 years. Running from the Air Force. Running from my past. Running from everything that reminds me I used to be someone competent. You walked into this cockpit, Reynolds pointed out. That's not running. That's... Marcus stopped, thought about it. That's different. How? Because you needed help. And you couldn't run from that. Marcus stared at the captain. At this man who'd just admitted his own fear, his own uncertainty, his own human fragility beneath the uniform and the authority. No, Marcus said quietly. I guess I couldn't. You know what I think, Reynolds said. I think running and surviving sometimes look the same from the outside. You didn't run from the Air Force. You survived something that broke you. You didn't run from your wife's death. You survived it and kept your son alive. You didn't run from your mother. You got on a plane and came to her. He paused. That's not a man who runs. That's a man who keeps getting back up. Marcus felt his throat tighten. When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen anything other than failure? When was the last time someone had reframed his story into something that didn't taste like ash? I don't feel like I'm getting up, Marcus said. I feel like I'm falling. Maybe that's the same thing too, Reynolds said. Maybe we're all falling. The question is whether we're falling alone or together. A beep from the instrument panel interrupted them. Mitchell checked the readout. Captain, hydraulic pressure is stabilizing. Reynolds looked. Sure enough, the numbers were trending green, the fluctuations evening out. Well, Reynolds said, looks like talking through it helped, or we got lucky. I'll take either. You think it's resolved? Marcus asked. I think it was never as bad as it could have been, but I'm still glad you're here. They spent another 10 minutes running through contingencies, backup plans, emergency procedures. Marcus found himself relaxing into it, muscle memory and training reasserting themselves. He wasn't flying, wasn't in control, but he was useful, present, part of something. Finally, Reynolds extended his hand. Captain Webb, thank you. Marcus shook it. The grip was firm, warm, human. I didn't do anything, Marcus said. You did everything that mattered, Reynolds replied. You showed up, you stood here, you reminded me I'm not alone in this. He smiled. That's worth more than you know. Marcus didn't know what to say. The gratitude felt too big, too undeserved. He'd just talked, just existed in a space for 20 minutes. That wasn't heroism. That wasn't salvation. But looking at Reynolds' face at the genuine relief there, maybe it didn't need to be. I should get back to my seat, Marcus said. One more thing. Reynolds caught his arm gently. Whatever you lost up here in the sky, whatever made you walk away, maybe it's time to find it again. Marcus looked at him, at this stranger who somehow understood. I don't know if I can. You just did, Reynolds said simply. Marcus turned to leave. His legs felt unsteady but different now. Not weak, just uncertain. Like walking after being still for too long. Mitchell spoke up. Captain Webb, for what it's worth, you haven't lost it. The pilot thing. It's still there. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Jessica was waiting outside the cockpit door. She smiled when she saw him. How did it go? I think it went okay. The captain radioed down, said you were exactly what he needed. Marcus shook his head. I just talked. Sometimes that's enough. She led him back down the aisle, but this walk was different from the walk forward. Marcus's shoulders were straighter, his head up. He wasn't cured, wasn't fixed. The weight he carried was still there, grinding and heavy. But something had shifted. Some small part of him that had been buried under 10 years of grief and failure and exhaustion had stirred, remembered, recognized itself. The cabin was quiet, passengers watching, waiting for news, waiting to know if they were safe. Marcus walked past them, past Patricia in 8B, who was gripping her armrests, past Derek in 8C, who had his headphones out and was openly staring, past Robert in row 9, who nodded once, a gesture of respect between men who knew what it cost to stand when sitting felt safer. Marcus reached seat 8A, sat down carefully. His hands were still shaking slightly, but the panic had faded. He felt hollowed out, exhausted, like he'd run a marathon in his mind. The cabin stayed silent. Then the intercom crackled. Reynolds' voice steady and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I wanted to update you on our earlier situation. The hydraulic issue has stabilized and we're cleared for normal approach into Boston. We'll be landing on schedule." Relief rippled through the cabin. People exhaling, shoulders relaxing. "I also want to thank a very special passenger for his assistance today," Reynolds continued. "Sometimes the right person is in the right place at exactly the right time. We're grateful to have him aboard." Applause started. Scattered at first, then building. Not the polite golf clap of a smooth landing. Real applause. Genuine. Emotional. Marcus sat frozen in 8A, staring at the seat in front of him. Patricia beside him turned tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Derek, across the aisle, gave him a thumbs up. Robert, behind him, leaned forward. "Well done, brother." The elderly woman a few rows up was crying. Her husband was clapping with arthritic hands, face creased in gratitude. Marcus felt something break inside him. Not break like shattering, break like a dam giving way. All the emotion he'd been holding back for 3 years since Lydia died, since he walked away from flying, since he started living in survival mode, with no room for feeling anything except the next crisis. Tears came, silent, unstoppable, streaming down his face in the dim cabin light. He'd spent 3 years believing he was useless, broken, a burden. Someone who took up space and resources and gave nothing back. Someone who'd failed at being a husband, failed at being a provider, failed at being the person he used to be. But for 20 minutes in a cockpit, talking to a captain who admitted he was afraid Marcus had been useful, had been seen, had mattered. It wasn't much, wasn't a cure, wasn't going to pay his rent or bring back his wife or fix everything that was broken in his life. But it was something, and maybe something was enough for now. Jessica brought him a cup of coffee. Real china, not plastic. A small kindness that felt enormous. "On the house," she said softly. Marcus took it with shaking hands. The warmth seeped into his palms. When was the last time someone had given him something? When was the last time he'd felt worthy of receiving? He couldn't remember. The plane began its descent. Boston appearing in the distance, city lights starting to glow in the late afternoon. Somewhere down there his mother waited in a hospital bed. Somewhere out west, Jake slept at Mrs. Chen's house with his lucky teddy bear missing. Marcus looked out the window at the clouds and sky and the world coming up to meet them. He thought about what Reynolds had said. Maybe it's time to find it again. Not the flying, not the Air Force, not the person he used to be. But maybe the person he could still be. The one who showed up when it cost everything. The one who stood when falling felt easier. The one who tried even knowing he might fail. The landing gear deployed with a hydraulic thump. The plane descended through clouds, through layers of atmosphere, through the space between sky and earth. Marcus, web father and widower and former combat pilot, held his coffee and cried quietly in seat 8A and felt something that had been dead for 3 years flicker weakly back to life. Not hope exactly, but not hopelessness either. Something in between, something fragile and new and terrifying, something that felt like maybe he could keep going. The coffee was still warm in Marcus's hands when Patricia spoke. She'd been sitting rigid in 8B since boarding body, angled away from him, purse clutched close like he might steal it. Now she turned and her eyes were wet. "I need to apologize," she said. Marcus looked at her. 40-something business clothes wedding ring catching the cabin light. She'd been working on her laptop earlier, typing emails with the focused intensity of someone important going somewhere important. "For what?" he asked. "When you sat down, She stopped, started again. "I judged you. I saw someone who looked tired and rough, and I made assumptions. I shifted away from you. I thought..." Her voice cracked. "I thought things I'm ashamed of now." "It's okay," Marcus said. "It's not okay." Patricia wiped her eyes. "My daughter is getting married next week. In Cambridge. I've been planning it for a year. When the captain made that announcement, all I could think was that I'd never see her walk down the aisle, never meet my grandchildren. All because I was on a plane, and something went wrong." She looked at Marcus directly now. "I was terrified, and you walked up there. You helped. You didn't have to, but you did." She reached out, touched his arm briefly. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Marcus didn't know what to say. The gratitude felt too big for what he'd actually done. He'd just stood in a cockpit and talked, that was all. "I'm glad I could help," he managed. Across the aisle, Derek pulled out his headphones completely. The college kid with the baby face and CU Boulder sweatshirt. "That was incredible, man," Derek said. He had that earnest quality of the very young, where everything is still big and dramatic and worthy of superlatives. Like genuinely incredible. "I just talked to them," Marcus said. "Dude, you're like a real hero. My dad was Air Force, flew cargo planes in the Gulf War. He'd be losing his mind right now if I told him I was on a flight with a combat pilot who helped land the plane. I didn't land anything. Still, that's badass." Derek grinned. "Can I get your name? My dad's gonna want to know." "Marcus. Marcus Webb. Derek Chen." He stuck his hand across the aisle. Marcus shook it, still holding the coffee cup in his other hand. "Seriously, man, thank you." From behind them, Robert leaned forward, the middle-aged insurance adjuster with tired eyes and the posture of someone who'd carried weight for a long time. "I don't know your story," Robert said quietly, "and I'm not asking. But whatever you're going through, you did a good thing today." Marcus turned in his seat to see him better. "I just showed up where I was asked. That's all any of us can do," Robert said. "Show up, do what we can. Sometimes that's everything." Something in the way he said it made Marcus think Robert understood more than he was saying. That he'd been in his own version of Seat 8A, exhausted and broken, and just trying to make it through. "Thank you," Marcus said. Robert nodded once. Man to man, brother to brother, in the fraternity of people who'd survived things they didn't talk about. Jessica appeared in the aisle again. This time, she carried a small tray. The coffee was just the beginning. Now, there was a sandwich turkey and Swiss on whole wheat. A small fruit cup, a cookie wrapped in plastic. Real food, the kind they served in first class. "From the captain," she said, setting it on Marcus's tray table. "And the crew." Marcus stared at it. "I can't pay for this." Jessica's expression softened. "It's not for sale, it's a gift. I don't need charity." "It's not charity." She crouched down in the aisle, bringing herself to eye level with him. "It's gratitude. There's a difference." Marcus looked at the food. His stomach was empty. He'd eaten a granola bar at 5 a.m. and nothing since. The sandwich looked incredible. The simple kindness of it made his throat tight. "When's the last time someone did something nice for you?" Jessica asked gently. Marcus had to think. Mrs. Chen watching Jake without asking for money. Before that, he honestly couldn't remember. Kindness had been rare in the past 3 years. He'd learned to expect nothing and be grateful for less. A while, he admitted. Then let someone do something nice. Okay. She stood to leave, but Marcus spoke. Jessica, she turned back. I'm going to Boston because my mother had a stroke, he said. He didn't know why he was telling her. Maybe because she'd been kind. Maybe because she'd seen him when he was invisible. I don't know if she's going to make it. I used my last money on this flight. Left my 7-year-old with a neighbor because I couldn't bring him. I work at a warehouse in Denver loading trucks. I'm 34 and I can barely keep my kid fed. Jessica's eyes glistened. I just need you to know, Marcus continued, voice rough, that I'm not anyone special. I'm not a hero. I'm just trying to make it through. Marcus, Jessica said quietly, everyone on this plane is trying to make it through. The difference is you showed up when someone needed you, even though you're exhausted, even though you're struggling, even though you had every reason to stay in your seat and let someone else handle it. She paused. That's exactly what makes you special. She walked away before he could respond, disappearing toward the galley. Marcus sat there holding his coffee, looking at the sandwich, feeling the weight of kindness like something he didn't know how to carry. He ate slowly. The sandwich was good, simple, perfect. Each bite felt like a small act of grace. Halfway through, an elderly man appeared in the aisle. Walter Morrison, 76, moving carefully with a cane. His wife Helen behind him, steadying him with a hand on his back. Young man. Walter's voice was gravelly but strong. Marcus looked up, wiped his mouth. Sir, I was Navy, Korea, 1952. Marcus stood up, years of the military training, making it automatic. Thank you for your service, sir. Walter waved that away. No, thank you. For yours. And for today. I didn't do much. You did enough. Walter's eyes, pale blue and sharp despite his age, studied Marcus. I've seen a lot of men in my life. Brave men, scared men, broken men trying to hold themselves together. You know what I learned? What's that? The bravest ones are usually the scared ones, the broken ones, because they show up anyway. Helen spoke from behind her husband. We're praying for your mother, dear. Marcus blinked. You don't even know me. Doesn't matter, Helen said. Her face was kind grandmotherly, the type that had baked cookies and bandaged scraped knees for 50 years. We heard you tell the flight attendant. We're praying anyway. Walter reached out, shook Marcus's hand with a grip that was still surprisingly firm. You take care of yourself, son, and your boy. They moved back to their seats, Helen helping Walter navigate the narrow aisle. Marcus sat down slowly. Strangers praying for his mother. Strangers caring about his story. When had that last happened? When had he last felt like part of something bigger than his own, small, grinding survival he couldn't remember? Movement in his peripheral vision. A young woman approaching, baby strapped to her chest in a carrier. Sophia, 28, dark hair pulled back, exhaustion written across her face. The baby was tiny, maybe 6 months, sleeping against her mother's chest. I'm sorry, Sophia said. I don't want to bother you. You're not, Marcus said. She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. When the captain made that announcement, all I could think about was my baby. If something happened, if she grew up without me, if I never got to see her first steps or hear her first words or... She stopped, breathing hard. I'm going to Boston for my sister's funeral. And I kept thinking, what if Emma becomes an orphan? What if we both die on this plane? Marcus saw the terror in her eyes. The same terror he'd felt every day since Lydia died. The fear of leaving Jake alone, of something happening and his son growing up without either parent. But nothing happened, Marcus said gently. Because of you. Not because of me. The captain and first officer had it under control. But you helped them. You were there. Sophia's voice broke. You showed up when they needed you. The baby stirred, making small sounds. Sophia adjusted her rocking slightly. How old? Marcus asked. 6 months. Her name is Emma. I have a son, Jake. He's 7. Then you know. Sophia looked at him with eyes that understood. You know what it means to need to go home to them. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he knew. Emma opened her eyes, dark and curious. She looked at Marcus, and something in her baby brain decided he was interesting. She reached out with a tiny hand. Marcus extended his finger without thinking. Emma grabbed at her grip surprisingly strong. He felt the warmth of her small hand, the trust of it, the simple human connection. She likes you, Sophia said, smiling through tears. Kids are good judges of character, Marcus said. Then he thought about it. Or maybe terrible ones, I'm not sure which. And Sophia laughed a wet sound. Thank you. For what you did. For being brave. After she left, Marcus sat with the memory of Emma's hand around his finger. The warmth of it. Jake used to do that when he was a baby. Would grab Marcus's finger and hold on like it was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Another passenger approached. This time, a businesswoman, Asian, mid-40s, carrying herself with professional confidence. Amanda Chen. She held out a business card. I don't normally do this, she said, but I run a veterans advocacy nonprofit in Boston. We help former military with transition services, job placement, mental health resources. Marcus took the card. Heavy stock. Professional printing. I appreciate it, but I'm not offering charity, Amanda interrupted. I'm offering connection, community, resources if you ever need them. I'm doing okay, Marcus lied. Amanda's expression said she didn't believe him. My brother came back from Iraq 8 years ago. Didn't talk for months. Wouldn't leave the house. Thought he was useless, broken a burden on everyone. She paused. It took him 5 years to ask for help. Please don't wait that long. Marcus looked at the card. Boston Veterans Network. A phone number, an email, a website. Just think about it, Amanda said. She turned to leave, then stopped. What you did today, that took courage. The kind my brother is still learning to find. Don't underestimate yourself. She walked away, and Marcus was left holding the card, feeling the weight of an offered lifeline he wasn't sure how to accept. He put it in his pocket, not throwing it away, not committing to use it, just keeping it, a small choice that felt bigger than it should. The cabin had settled into quieter activity now. The crisis passed. People returning to their phones, their laptops, their private worlds. But something had shifted. Strangers who'd never spoken had become briefly connected by shared fear and shared relief. Marcus looked out the window. They were descending now, the plane dropping through layers of clouds. Below, the landscape changing from farmland to suburbs to the sprawling complexity of greater Boston. Somewhere down there, his mother waited in a hospital bed. He thought about the past 3 years, the grinding loneliness of it. Working double shifts, coming home to an empty apartment, microwaving dinners for Jake, helping with homework while fighting exhaustion, paying bills that never seemed to shrink, carrying the weight of being both mother and father, provider and nurturer, strong one and soft one. He'd thought he was surviving, thought he was doing what needed to be done. Put one foot in front of the other. Keep Jake alive and fed and loved. That was the mission. That was everything. But Reynolds had said something that kept echoing. Maybe running and surviving looked the same from the outside. Had Marcus been surviving, or had he been hiding? Hiding from his past, hiding from people, hiding from the possibility that he could be more than just a warehouse worker grinding through shifts, hiding from the part of him that used to fly, used to be confident, used to believe he mattered. The memories came different now, not as attacks, not as trauma, just as memories. Lydia on their wedding day, not the accident, not the funeral, just her laugh, her smile, the way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth loving. Jake as a baby, the weight of him in Marcus's arms, the trust in those infant eyes, the F-16 cockpit. Not the fear, not the guilt, not the mission that broke him, just the feeling of flight, of freedom, of being connected to something bigger than himself. Maybe those things weren't lost. Maybe they were just buried under years of grief and exhaustion and the relentless weight of just trying to survive. Maybe showing up in the cockpit today hadn't been an accident. Maybe it was muscle memory. The part of him that used to be a pilot, a husband, a person who believed he had something to offer, reaching up through the layers of damage and saying, "I'm still here." The plane dropped lower. Boston coming into focus. The harbor, the skyline, the grid of streets and buildings. Marcus thought about Jake waiting for him in Denver, about his mother fighting in a hospital bed, about all the strangers on this plane who'd looked at him with gratitude instead of judgment. Maybe he wasn't as broken as he thought. Maybe broken and functioning weren't opposites. Maybe you could be both. Cracked but still standing, damaged but still useful. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thunk. The plane shuddered slightly, then smoothed out. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into Boston Logan International Airport. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Marcus tightened his seatbelt, looked out at the city rising to meet them. The runway appeared below. Concrete and lights and the solid earth after hours suspended in sky. The wheels touched, gentle, professional. Reynolds earning his 32 years of experience with a landing so smooth you barely felt it. Applause broke out again, not as loud as before, more subdued but genuine. People grateful to be on the ground, grateful to be alive. Grateful for pilots who knew what they were doing and passengers who showed up when needed. Marcus clapped too. For Reynolds. For Mitchell. For Jessica and the crew. For all the small moments of competence and kindness that had carried them safely from Denver to Boston. The plane taxied toward the gate. Building sliding past the windows. Ground crew in reflective vests. Jet bridges waiting like mechanical arms. Marcus gathered his backpack from under the seat, felt Jake's teddy bear inside, wrapped in a sock. He pulled it out, held it for a moment. His son's lucky charm, the thing Jake believed would keep his father safe. Maybe it had. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. People stood reaching for overhead bins, gathering belongings, preparing to rush off into their lives. Marcus stood more slowly. His body ached from tension and exhaustion. But it was a different ache now. Not the grinding pain of defeat. Something else. The ache of muscles used, of effort expended, of showing up and trying. He joined the line in the aisle. Slow shuffle toward the exit. Patricia ahead of him, Derek behind. Strangers who weren't quite strangers anymore. At the cockpit door, Reynolds stood, out of his seat now, greeting passengers as they deplaned. He saw Marcus and extended his hand. "Captain Webb, safe travels." Marcus shook it. "Thank you, Captain, for everything." "You helped more than you know," Reynolds said. "I meant what I said. Find your wings again." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He moved through the jet bridge. The air was different here. East Coast humidity. The smell of a different city. Boston instead of Denver. The terminal was busy. People rushing everywhere. Business travelers on phones, families reuniting. The chaos of arrival. Marcus stood still for a moment, letting the flow move around him. His phone was in his pocket. He should call Sarah. Should head to the hospital, should keep moving. But first, he pulled out his phone, found Mrs. Chen's number. "Marcus," she answered on the second ring. "You made it, just landed. Is Jake still up?" "He wanted to wait for you to call. Hold on." Rustling sounds. Then Jake's voice, small and sleepy. "Dad?" Marcus felt his chest compress. "Hey, buddy, I made it. Did the bear help?" "It helped so much." Marcus looked at the worn teddy in his hand. "I'm bringing him home safe." "Good. I miss him, and you." "I miss you too, so much." "Is Grandma okay?" "I don't know yet. I'm heading to see her now." "Tell her I love her." "I will." "Dad?" "Yeah." "Mrs. Chen made spaghetti for dinner, and she let me have ice cream." Marcus smiled, first real smile in hours. "That's great, buddy. I wish you were here. I'll be home soon. 3 days, maybe 4. Okay. Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too." The call ended. Marcus stood in the terminal holding his phone, blinking back tears. A small voice spoke. "Mr." Marcus looked down. A boy, maybe 8, tugging on his jacket. Behind him, a woman in her mid-30s watching nervously. "Yeah, buddy." The boy looked up with serious eyes. "My mom says you're a hero." The words hit Marcus like a physical thing. He crouched down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Tommy." "Well, Tommy, I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who helped." "You helped the pilot. I talked to him, that's all." "That's what heroes do," Tommy said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "They help people." Tommy's mother, Linda, stepped forward. "I'm sorry." He wouldn't let it go. He kept asking about the man who went to the cockpit. "It's okay," Marcus said. He looked at Tommy. "You know what real heroes do?" Tommy shook his head. "They show up, even when they're scared, even when they don't feel like heroes. They just show up and do what they can." "Are you scared?" Tommy asked. Marcus thought about lying. Thought about being the strong one, the confident one, the person a kid could look up to. But Tommy deserved honesty. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I'm scared a lot. But you still help people. I try." Tommy smiled. "Then you're brave." His mother touched Tommy's shoulder. "We should let him go. I'm sure he has somewhere to be." Marcus stood up. "Do you have kids?" Tommy asked. "A son, about your age. His name is Jake." "Is he brave like you?" Marcus thought about Jake handing him the teddy bear. About Jake saying, "You're the bravest person I know." About a 7-year-old trying to take care of his father. "Yeah," Marcus said, voice thick. "He's the bravest person I know." Tommy beamed. Linda mouthed thank you and guided her son away. Marcus watched them go. Then he shouldered his backpack, tucked Jake's bear under his arm, and headed towards the terminal exit. He had a mother to see, a sister to meet, a hospital room waiting. But for the first time in 3 years, walking through an airport in a strange city with almost no money and a mountain of problems waiting, Marcus Webb felt something he'd almost forgotten. Not happiness. Not exactly, but the possibility of it. The small, fragile sense that maybe tomorrow didn't have to be exactly like yesterday. That maybe he could be more than just survival mode. That maybe showing up was enough. That maybe he mattered. It wasn't much, wasn't a cure, wasn't going to solve his problems or bring back his wife, or make Jake's childhood easy. But it was something, and for now, something was enough. Massachusetts General Hospital rose against the Boston skyline like a monument to human fragility and resilience. Marcus arrived at 8:45 p.m., exhausted from the flight and the taxi ride through unfamiliar streets. The building was all glass and steel and fluorescent light, the kind of place where people came to fight battles that didn't involve weapons. The lobby smelled like antiseptic and coffee. Security guards nodded him through. The elevator carried him to the 7th floor ICU, where the seriously ill lived in rooms filled with machines that beeped and hummed and kept track of heartbeats. Sarah was in the hallway outside room 714. She looked like Marcus felt, exhausted, wrung out, running on fumes and fear and the desperate hope that their mother would make it through. Marcus. She stood when she saw him, pulled him into a hug that felt like coming home. You made it. How is she? Sarah pulled back, wiped her eyes. Stable, awake. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. She's strong, stubborn. She gets that from Dad. She gets that from herself. Sarah managed a smile. She's been asking for you. Hasn't stopped since I told her you were coming. They walked to the room together. Sarah pushed open the door. Helen Webb was small in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines and all the machinery of modern medicine keeping people alive. But her eyes were clear when she saw Marcus. Alert, present. Marcus. Her voice was weak but steady. He crossed the room in 3 steps, took her hand. The skin was thin, cool, but her grip was surprisingly strong. I'm here, Mom. You look different. Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed. Different how? Helen studied his face with the attention of a mother who'd spent 34 years reading her son's expressions. Lighter, like something lifted. Sarah stood at the foot of the bed watching. Marcus didn't know how to explain it. The flight, the cockpit, the strangers who'd thanked him, the way Reynolds had looked at him and seen someone worth saving instead of someone broken beyond repair. Something happened on the plane, he said finally. Tell me. So he did. He told her about the turbulence, the captain's announcement, Jessica touching his shoulder, about walking to the cockpit even though every instinct screamed to stay hidden, about Reynolds admitting he was afraid about the conversation that wasn't about heroics but about being present, about the passengers afterward, their gratitude, their kindness, the way they'd looked at him like he mattered. Helen listened without interrupting. When he finished, tears tracked down her weathered face. Your father would be so proud, she said. Marcus shook his head. Dad always said I ran from things. Remember? When I didn't want to go to college when I enlisted instead of getting a degree first. He said I was running. He said that once, when you were 17 and scared. Helen's grip tightened on his hand. You were never running, Marcus. You were finding your path. I quit the Air Force. I walked away. You survived something that broke you. There's a difference. What's the difference? Helen took a careful breath, mindful of the oxygen line in her nose. Surviving is staying alive when everything in you wants to stop. Living is showing up even when you don't have to, even when it costs you everything. She paused. You showed up today, on that plane, for me. That's living. Sarah spoke from the foot of the bed. She's right. You could have stayed in Denver, could have said you couldn't afford it. But you came. Marcus thought about the credit card debt, the rent he couldn't pay, Jake sleeping at Mrs. Chen's without his lucky bear, all the ways this trip would make his life harder. I didn't have a choice, he said. There's always a choice, Helen said. You chose family, you chose to show up. They talked for another hour. Sarah filling in details about the stroke, the treatment, the prognosis. Helen improving every hour, but still fragile, still fighting. Marcus telling stories about Jake, about work, about the small moments of his life in Denver. Around 10 p.m., a nurse came in and suggested they let Helen rest. Sarah kissed their mother's forehead. Marcus did the same. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. "Marcus." Helen caught his hand one more time. "Whatever you think you lost, it's still there. You just forgot where to look." He nodded, not trusting his voice. In the hallway, Sarah put her arm through his. "You want to get coffee? There's a decent place down the street." "Actually, I need to sit for a minute. Think. The chapel's on the 3rd floor. It's quiet." Marcus took the stairs down. The hospital chapel was small, non-denominational, with rows of wooden chairs and dim lighting and candles flickering in red glass holders. Empty at this hour. He sat in the back row, let the quiet wash over him. He wasn't religious. Hadn't been since Lydia died. Couldn't reconcile a loving God with a world that took mothers from 7-year-olds that let good people suffer while bad people thrived. But there was something about sacred spaces, the weight of other people's prayers, the accumulated hope of everyone who'd ever sat here asking for miracles. Marcus pulled out his wallet. Inside, folded and worn, was a photo. Him in his flight suit, Lydia pregnant with Jake, both of them young and stupid and full of hope. Before the war, before the accident, before everything that came after. He looked at it now without the usual surge of pain, just memory. Lydia smiling at the camera, her hand on her belly. Marcus with his arm around her, believing the future was something he could control. They'd been so young. He pulled out the other things in his pockets. Amanda Chen's business card, a napkin with Jessica's handwriting, just 2 words, "You matter." A note Patricia had slipped him before deplaning, "Thank you for being brave." Small pieces of paper. Cheap kindnesses from strangers, but they felt like something more, like evidence, proof that today had happened, that he'd walked into a cockpit and been useful, that people had seen him and found him worthy. Marcus sat there for a long time holding these small artifacts of grace. What had he done today? Really? He'd talked to a pilot, stood in a cockpit, shared some technical knowledge he'd almost forgotten. That was it. That was everything. But somehow it had mattered. Somehow showing up when he felt least qualified had been exactly enough. Maybe that was the point. Maybe heroism wasn't about being perfect or fearless or ready. Maybe it was just about being present, being willing, being human enough to help when help was needed. He thought about Lydia, not the accident, not the funeral, not the 3 years of grief, just her voice the way she'd sounded the day they got married. "Marcus, you're the guy who shows up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's why I love you." Had he forgotten that? Had he spent 3 years believing he was useless because he wasn't the person he used to be? Because he couldn't fly anymore, couldn't earn enough money, couldn't keep his wife alive? Maybe he'd been measuring himself against an impossible standard. Maybe everyone was just doing their best with broken pieces. Maybe that was enough. Marcus put the photo back in his wallet, put the business card and notes in his pocket, stood up from the wooden chair. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen. A photo of Jake asleep on her couch, paper airplane clutched in his small hand. The caption, "Made this for Dad. Can't wait to show him how it flies." Marcus stared at the image. His son. His reason for everything. The person who kept him getting up every morning even when staying down felt easier. He typed back, "Can't wait to see it, buddy. Love you so much." Another buzz. Unknown number this time. He answered. "Hello, Captain Webb. This is Tom Reynolds from Flight 2847. Marcus sat back down. "Captain, how did you get my number?" "Jessica gave it to me. Hope that's okay. I wanted to check on you and your mother. She's stable. Going to be okay, I think." "That's good. Really good." Reynolds paused. "Listen, I know this might sound strange, but I wanted to thank you again." After you left the cockpit, Mitchell and I talked about fear, about admitting when you need help, about what it means to be in command. You helped more than you know, no. I just stood there. You reminded me I wasn't alone. Sometimes that's everything. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I understand that more than you know. I figured you might. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. What I said earlier about finding your wings. I meant it. Whatever made you walk away from flying, you still have it. The instinct, the knowledge, the calm under pressure. Don't waste that. I don't know if I can go back to that life. Maybe you don't need to go back. Maybe you need to go forward. Different path, same skills. I'll think about it. Good. Take care of yourself, Captain. You too. After the call ended, Marcus sat holding his phone, thinking about wings and paths and the difference between going back and going forward. He left the chapel. Found Sarah in the waiting room working on her laptop. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I think so. Where are you staying tonight? Hadn't thought about it. Stay at my place. Guest room's all yours. Marcus followed her home, a small apartment in Somerville. Crashed in the guest bed, still wearing his clothes, too tired to even brush his teeth. Slept hard for the first time in months, dreamless and deep. The next morning, Sarah made coffee and eggs. They ate in comfortable silence, siblings who'd grown up together and grown apart, and were finding their way back. When do you fly home? Sarah asked. Tomorrow afternoon. Need to get back to Jake. How is he really? Marcus thought about his son. 7 years old and already carrying weight no kid should carry. But brave. God, so brave. He's good, tough, like his mom. Like his dad, too. After breakfast, Marcus had a few hours before visiting hours at the hospital. He wandered, found himself in a Barnes & Noble near Harvard Square, drifted through the aisles. The aviation section called to him. Books about flying, about aircraft design, about the history of flight. He picked up one, Returning to Flight: A Pilot's Journey. Memoir of a Navy pilot who'd quit after a bad crash, spent 10 years working construction, then found his way back to the cockpit as a flight instructor. Marcus bought it. First book he'd purchased in years, paid with the last $20 in his wallet. Walking back to Sarah's apartment, his phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen. Another photo. Jake at her kitchen table doing homework, tongue stuck out in concentration. Marcus typed, "Tell him I'll be home tomorrow. Tell him I love him." Mrs. Chen replied, "He knows. He's proud of you." That afternoon at the hospital, Helen was sitting up in bed, color returning to her face. The doctors were talking about moving her out of ICU in a day or two. Progress. Hope. Marcus told her about the phone call from Reynolds, about the book he'd bought, about the business card in his pocket. "Are you going to call them?" Helen asked. "The Veterans Organization, I don't know, maybe." "Marcus, listen to me." His mother's voice was stronger today. "You've spent 3 years in survival mode, working yourself to death, barely hanging on. That's not living. That's just not dying. What's the difference? Living means taking risks, asking for help, being open to possibilities." She reached for his hand. "You're a good father, a good son, but you're more than that too. Don't forget." That evening, Sarah drove him back to the airport. They sat in the departures drop-off, hazard lights blinking. "Thanks for coming," Sarah said. "Mom needed to see you. I needed to see her too. You going to be okay?" Marcus thought about it. "Yeah, I think so." They hugged awkward across the car's center console. Then Marcus grabbed his backpack and headed into the terminal. Same airport, different feeling. He wasn't running to something now. He was going home. The flight back to Denver was late evening, half empty. When Marcus checked in the gate, agent looked at his ticket and smiled. Seat 8A again. Lucky number, something like that. Boarding was quick. Marcus walked down the aisle to his window seat. The woman in 8B was already there, young professional headphones in. She glanced at him, then went back to her phone. No judgment, no fear. Just a stranger on a plane. Marcus settled in, put Jake's teddy bear in his lap. Looked out the window at Boston disappearing in the twilight. A flight attendant stopped at his row. Not Jessica, but young eager professional. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, sir?" "I'm good, thank you." She started to move on, then stopped. "Wait, were you on flight 2847 yesterday from Denver?" Marcus nodded. Her face lit up. "We got a company-wide email about what you did. That was incredible." "I didn't do much." "You did enough," she smiled. "It's an honor to have you on board." She walked away before Marcus could respond. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway. Marcus watched the city lights, the harbor, the coastline. He'd come here broken and desperate, flying on credit he couldn't afford to see a mother who might be dying. He was leaving with something different. Not fixed, not whole, but different. The engines roared. The plane accelerated down the runway, lifted, climbed into the night sky. Marcus didn't sleep this time. Stayed awake, watching the darkness outside the wing lights blinking steady, the world sliding past below. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, he pulled out Amanda Chen's business card, stared at it for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone, typed an email. "Ms. Chen, my name is Marcus Webb. We met on flight 2847 2 days ago. I'm not sure I'm ready for everything, not sure I'm ready for anything, honestly, but maybe I'm ready to start, to try. Can we talk?" He stared at the draft, his thumb hovering over send. What was he afraid of? Failing again. Looking weak. Admitting he needed help. He thought about Reynolds in the cockpit, admitting he was scared. About Jessica saying everyone's just trying to make it through. About Tommy asking if he was brave even when he was afraid. Marcus hit send. The plane descended into Denver. Mountains appearing in the distance, city lights spreading like stars across the high plains. Home, whatever that meant. They landed smooth, taxied to the gate. Marcus gathered his things, joined the line, shuffling toward the exit. In the terminal, he checked his phone. One new email. From Amanda Chen. "Marcus, thank you for reaching out. I'm proud of you for taking this step. Let's talk next week. You're not alone in this." He read it 3 times. Let the words sink in. You're not alone. Mrs. Chen's house was dark when the Uber dropped him off at midnight. She'd left the porch light on. A note on the door, "Jake is sleeping in the guest room. Come get him whenever. So glad you're home safe." Marcus opened the door quietly. The house smelled like cinnamon and old wood. He found Jake in the small guest room, curled under a quilt, breathing slow and steady. Marcus crouched beside the bed, put his hand on his son's small shoulder. Jake's eyes opened, sleepy, confused, then recognition and joy. "Dad," he threw his arms around Marcus's neck. Marcus held him, this small person who was his entire world, and felt something break open in his chest. "I missed you so much," Jake mumbled into his shoulder. "I missed you too, buddy. Did you bring the bear?" Marcus pulled it out of his backpack. Jake took it, held it close. "Did he keep you safe?" "He kept me very safe." "Good," Jake yawned. "Can we go home?" "Yeah, let's go home." Marcus carried his son to the car, Jake already falling back asleep, Bear clutched tight. Drove through empty Denver streets to their small apartment. Inside, Marcus laid Jake in his bed, tucked him in, smoothed his hair. "Dad?" Jake's eyes opened again. "Something's different about you." "What do you mean? You seem happier." Marcus thought about the past 2 days. The flight, the cockpit, the strangers who'd shown him kindness, his mother's words, Reynolds' phone call, the email he'd sent. "I think I'm happier," he said. "Why? Because someone reminded me who I am." "Who are you?" Marcus looked at his son. This brave, beautiful boy who'd lost his mother and never complained, who gave away his lucky bear because he thought his father needed it more. "I'm your dad," Marcus said quietly, "and that's enough." Jake smiled, already drifting off. "I love you, Dad. I love you too." Marcus went to the kitchen, made coffee even though it was late, sat at the small table looking out at Denver lights. On the counter, his phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. Photo of their mother sitting up in bed, smiling color in her face. Caption. "She's asking when you're coming back to visit." Marcus typed, "Soon." "Tell her soon." He looked around the apartment. Small, shabby, cheap furniture and worn carpet and walls that needed paint. But it was home. It was theirs. On the shelf across the room, the framed photo of Lydia sat face down where it had been for 3 years. Marcus stood up, walked over, picked it up, looked at his wife's face, her smile, the joy in her eyes, the future they'd believed in. He set the photo upright on the shelf. For the first time since she died. "I'm finding my way back," he whispered to the image. "Slowly, but I'm trying." The photo didn't answer, but he felt something shift anyway. Permission, maybe, or forgiveness, or just the simple acceptance that grief and hope could exist in the same space. Marcus went to bed, lay in the dark thinking about wings and falling, and the difference between running and surviving. Reynolds had said everyone's falling. The question is whether we fall alone or together. For 3 years, Marcus had fallen alone, isolated, convinced his weight was his to carry and nobody else would understand. But on Flight 2847, strangers had caught him. Jessica, Reynolds, Patricia and Derek and Robert, Walter and Helen Morrison, Sophia with baby Emma, Amanda Chen, even Tommy the 8-year-old who called him brave. They'd shown him that falling and flying sometimes looked the same, that showing up was enough, that maybe he wasn't as broken as he thought. Maybe tomorrow would be the same as yesterday, same warehouse, same bills, same grinding struggle to make rent and feed his son and survive one more day. Or maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe he'd call Amanda Chen's organization. Maybe he'd apply for that flight instructor position he'd seen online. Maybe he'd let Mrs. Chen watch Jake for an hour so he could go to the free veterans support group at the library. Maybe, small word, fragile word, but it was a start. Marcus closed his eyes, thought about Jake sleeping down the hall, about his mother healing in Boston, about Lydia's photo standing upright again, about the teddy bear that held luck and the strangers who'd shown kindness, and the captain who'd reminded him that asking for help was brave, not weak. He thought about Seat 8A and cockpit conversations and the feeling of being useful again after 3 years of believing he had nothing left to offer. The past 2 days hadn't fixed him, hadn't solved his problems, hadn't erased the debt or brought back his wife or made his life suddenly easy, but something had changed, some small shift in how he saw himself. Not as a man who'd failed at everything, but as a man who kept showing up, who fell and got up, who was scared and tried anyway. Maybe that was enough. Maybe he was enough. Marcus fell asleep thinking about wings and wondering if maybe, just maybe, he could learn to fly again. Not in fighter jets or combat missions or the life he used to have, but in this life, the one he was actually living, with a 7-year-old who believed in lucky bears and a mother who saw him clearly and strangers who'd looked at him and found him worthy. It wasn't much, but it was something, and sometimes something was everything. Outside, Denver slept. The mountains stood silent against the stars. Planes took off and landed at the airport carrying their cargo of human stories, human hopes, human fear, and courage mixed together. And in a small apartment on Capitol Hill, Marcus Webb dreamed of flying. Not the old dreams. Not nightmares of missions gone wrong or flames or screaming. Just flying. Peaceful. Free. The sky opening up and saying, "Welcome home." When he woke the next morning, Jake was standing beside his bed holding the paper airplane he'd made. "Want to see it fly?" Jake asked. Marcus smiled. "Yeah, buddy, I really do." They went outside into the cold morning air. Jake threw the plane. It soared, dipped, caught, and updraft flew higher than it should have. Marcus watched it go, his son's laughter bright in the winter air, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope, small and fragile and afraid of its own shadow, but there, real. Alive. Stories like this remind us that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up when you're exhausted. Being there when someone needs you. Choosing connection over isolation. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the person in seat 8A, or the stranger who offered kindness, or the captain who admitted fear, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. What moment hit you hardest? Whether you believe in second chances. And if you believe stories like this matter, that real human connection still exists in our fractured world, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's falling and needs to know they're not alone. Because maybe we're all in seat 8A sometimes. Broken, exhausted, convinced we have nothing left to give. Until someone asks for help, and we find we still have something to offer after all. Thanks for being here. For listening, for believing that kindness still counts. See you in the next story.